Hello everyone, welcome back to the Product Marketing Festival in APAC. With product marketing experts from Singapore, Australia, China mainland, Hong Kong, Malaysia, India, and many other regions. We'll be covering all product marketing aspects from sales enablement, go-to-market strategy, to customer onboarding, positioning, and messaging. We got them all. You are guaranteed to walk away with tons of new ideas and strategies to take your product to the next level. I would also like to take this chance to say a big thank you to all festival speakers. We cannot make this without you. Also, thanks for the support from iClick Interactive. Their presentation, Discover the Secret to Adapting Data-Driven Marketing in China, is scheduled at day 1 afternoon, 3:30 Singapore time. I highly recommend it if you have not signed up for it yet. Last but not the least, if you would like to interact with our speakers and other attendees, please join our group page link at the end. We look forward to the Q&A session and your feedback over there. Relax and enjoy the festival.
iClick Interactive's marketing technology platform is fueled by data. Our data helps to drive, connect, and enable every step of all marketing activities conducted on our platform. When marketing to China, the key challenge lies in the lack of quality and deployable data to start with. And this is where we come in to help. Every brand has its own target segment, and there is no one-size-fits-all solution. With our proprietary keyword-based audience identification engine, a unique solution among online marketing technology platforms in China, we help brands to move from rigid, predefined audience categories to intuitively defining their own custom target segments. The intelligence comes with in-depth audience knowledge in a multi-dimensional manner, from demographics and geographies to psychographics, giving brands meaningful understanding of their target segments on what they do, what they like, and what they care about. Brands can then readily size up their total accessible market opportunity and decide if it's right or big enough for them. And we don't just take a snapshot of these segments. We're capable of monitoring their changes over time, helping brands to drive the marketing funnel down from potential audiences and brand followers to website visitors and owned users. Brands can also benchmark specific product portfolio followers with actual sales to identify areas for growth. Getting to know your competitors is just as important as knowing your customers. Our platform allows brands to learn about their own position in the market as well as that of their competitors, helping brands to adjust their overall brand strategy. While the intelligence is good for decision-making purpose, brands can actually activate the data right away on the same platform via our massive media network in China, delivering messages to their target segments via the right channel, on the right device, at the right time. We also help brands conduct online-offline conversion by mapping their audience hotspots in the Chinese cities to develop data-driven, location-based retail strategy, intelligently converting online traffic to offline leads and realize smart online-offline integration. Having an accurate grasp of data intelligence is a vital first step to any successful marketing initiatives. With our ever-growing data capabilities, we look forward to empowering brands on their China-targeted marketing initiatives.
All right, so before I get started, I want to do a quick poll in the audience. So how many of you have actually talked to your customers before? Okay. How many of you have gone out and visited your customers? Okay. And how many of you feel confident in actually knowing your customers, knowing your audience in your day-to-day jobs? Okay, great. So less hands. So at Dropbox, we went through a lot of these questions in our early days. And what we realized is we didn't feel confident a lot about the answers that you guys had just raised your hands on. And so today I'm going to take you through a little bit of our journey of how we reimagined customer listening. So a little bit about me before we get started. So I was born and raised in San Francisco in the Bay Area, the tech bubble, as you guys call it, for better, for worse. And I started my career out at a company called Intuit QuickBooks, which is an accounting software platform. And one of the reasons I loved this experience was the opportunity to learn customer obsession. So starting with our founder, Scott Cook, he basically lived and breathed customer insights, and it was a part of everything in our organization. So in every meeting, all the way leading up to the CEO, people would ask, well, what did the customer say? And if you didn't have an answer, you had to go back out in the field and figure it out. The other program we had at Intuit was a program called the Customer Follow Me Home program, where every quarter, 2 times, you had to go out and visit customers in the field, get insights, learn a little bit about their challenges, and come back to the organization with feedback. So I learned a lot of that at Intuit, and then about 5 years ago, I moved over to Sydney with Intuit QuickBooks and brought that Customer Follow Me Home program and insights to the region, learning not just localization, and not just translation, but localization, and really getting a feel for the local market. And then 2.5 years ago, I started my career at Dropbox doing product marketing for the APAC region, learning a lot more about customer insights and how they differ in regions like Asia and Japan, and not to mention the nuances that exist in Australia. Even though we speak English, there's a lot of nuances that are different to how things operate in the US. A little bit around marketing at Dropbox. So we have a lot of different functions that we represent. So we have global sales and channel. We've got customer strategy and insights, doing a lot of the customer research for us. We've got an analytics team. We've got digital marketing. And last but not least, we have product marketing. So Dropbox, we are now at over 500 million users around the world. And we see ourselves as a proxy for the way the future of work is heading. And we have the opportunity every day to talk to all these people and understand what's a day in the life look like for you guys. And what we realized in a lot of our research, it was really simple. From the moment they wake up to the moment they go to bed, what does your day look like? And what we found was it actually looked like this. How many of you feel like your workday looks like this, just bouncing in and out of tools? Yeah, there's a lot of chaos, and you're not really sure whether you send something in email or Slack or chat or whatever, and you're spending more time sifting through that information and what we call the work about work than the work itself. And so we set out on this challenge to start solving this, because I think we had this revelation, as many tech companies are starting to realize, is we created tech to solve all these problems, but it actually left us with so many more problems to go figure out. So at Dropbox, we started this mission about 2 years ago of designing a more enlightened way of working. How do we actually get to a place where people are focusing more on the meaningful work itself and less so on the tasks and the back and forth behind the scenes to get that work done? Another thing about Dropbox is that our value system has been very strong and clear from the beginning with Drew and Arash, our co-founders, starting back in 2007. And we actually only recently in the last year refreshed our values. And this is probably my favorite value of the refreshed values, which is making work human. And essentially, it's how do we put customers and people back at the center of what we do? That whole cluster of cluttered tools that you guys saw, it's easy to get caught up behind the scenes in just metrics and data, but you actually have to go and talk to these people to truly solve a customer pain point and a need. So customer listening takes a lot of different forms at our company. Starting from online, you've got your social channels, you've got chat and conversations online, you've got in-product feedback and discovery. We also have a program called Real World Wednesdays, which once a week we bring in customers from different segments, cohorts, verticals, and it's almost like dating, rotational dating, where you actually get to go and do one-on-ones with customers from different products and say, here's a prototype we're thinking about, and how do we actually fix that? And is this something that resonates with you? And they're really scrappy prototypes, but it's a great way of speed dating to basically say, here's something that we're thinking about, what do you guys think? And getting that quick feedback. We also have customer visits, going out in the field, visiting customers in the wild, in their environment. This takes many forms at other companies, for example, like Amazon for Audible. They go out and follow people on subways and watch how they're listening to podcasts and books, and you'll see it come through in a lot of different ways. And last but not least, what I'm going to be focusing on today is this community building and connection through our customer advisory boards. So before you start a customer advisory board, there's a lot of things you need to think about. Specifically, how do you actually create the audience of who you want to provide feedback to your company? So there's a lot of ways you can actually cut it. You can look at super users. How many people are most engaged with your product? Is it monthly active users, weekly active users? Or do you want to segment it by top brands? So companies like Facebook or New York Times or the University of Sydney, do we want them to eventually become advocates for our company and start nurturing them through a customer advisory board? It could also be highest revenue generated customers, people giving the most money to your organization, obviously wanting to cater and make sure that the product direction is heading the way that their organizations are heading. It can also be educators and teachers. So for example, at Canva, they have a program to educate all these evangelists to go out and teach their Canva tools externally. And last but not least, at Facebook, they recently launched this for this company page, Merits and Badges, where basically if you're commenting as a fan or engaging with your page quite frequently, you get this little trophy, a digital trophy of sorts, which is a merit badge. And that basically signifies to this person, thank you for being an advocate, and there's maybe some special privileges that you can get advocating for the brand that you're engaging with most. So these are just some of the many ways that you can cut the data for a customer advisory board. So what is a customer advisory board? It's very simple. It's basically providing feedback on our company and our product. So in the case for Dropbox, like I mentioned earlier, we were out to solve this big problem around cluttered tools and content in Teams. And last year we launched a product called the Smart Workspace, which was basically an opportunity to integrate all your different workflows in one single location. But we needed to get feedback. It was a complete transformation for Dropbox. We started off as a company, as you guys all know, as file sync and share and storing files. How do you actually bring everyone and your customers and your advocates on that journey as you transition to this new product suite and this new category? And the second is best practice sharing and community building. A lot of these people are here to network with peers, similar to what we're doing here today, and they want to learn from what other people are doing. Maybe someone's 5 years down the line in your product, in their journey, and someone's just starting out. And maybe the person just starting out wants to know, how did you get your organization on board with your tool or your product, and how do you get them engaged over time? So why does customer advisory board sit in product marketing, you may ask? Number one, as many of you guys had mentioned in some of your previous talk tracks, we're the central glue. We are between product, engineering, comms, sales, channel, etc., you name it, we are that functional glue. Two, we actually are the partners with product to build out what we call marketing requirements documents. So once you understand and assess the market, the competitive landscape, then you're getting into what do we actually need to build that solves for a true challenge that's unique and differentiated. We also are the ones that amplify these advocates and champions. So we're the ones in marketing then building use cases and stories and telling that externally to get more people using our product. And last but not least, we're building narratives and positioning docs and even coming up with pricing and packaging SKUs to make sure that there's a place where this new product will sit. So as I mentioned before, this customer advisory board is something that took off about 1.5 years ago. So it's pretty fresh at Dropbox. And we had customer advisory boards in San Francisco, New York, London, Tokyo, and Sydney. So all of our key regions. And initially it started out as once a year, you would get together and pick your top customers. We had a sweet spot last year of around 20 customers. And what we found is it was actually too big of an audience. So it actually scaled to a smaller group of 10 to 12 as kind of that sweet spot. So as you can imagine, after doing this many customer advisory boards across so many areas around the world, you're probably wondering, like, what do you do with all the insights? Like, there's so much feedback coming through, like, what happens next? And I had that same question after a year of doing it, which was, why don't we start leveraging frameworks like design thinking to actually turn insights into action? So what is design thinking used for? It's a framework to basically understand the user. So you're having a lot of time to empathize with the customer, understand their challenges and unique pain points, which I'll take you guys through how we did that in a minute. You can challenge current assumptions. So maybe your product team is saying, oh, the customers definitely feel this way about a certain issue or pain point. But in actuality, they feel totally different. And last is redefining the problem. Maybe you've gone out as a product team or a PMM team and you're going off to solve a specific challenge, but there's actually something that's more deeper rooted that you probably haven't thought of yet. Design thinking is a framework where you can actually cut through the clutter and actually get to that clarity. And just to quickly broaden it out, design thinking can also be applied to whether you're doing a social campaign and making sure it's customer backed. It can be a new client space. If let's say you're hiring on or you have a new client on board and you're building and designing a space with their values in mind? How do you actually think about them in the space that they interact with? And how do you prove a new way of working? So for me, 2.5 years ago, I joined bright-eyed, bushy-tailed, and I'm like, I've got all these ideas. And you get these people who've been at the company a while that are like, oh yeah, we've done that before. Or like, oh yeah, good idea, but we've already solved for that in a different way. And you get to this point where you're like, all right, I realize like I need data to prove that this is the new way that I want to work. And by doing design thinking, it's a great way to get a lot of data points and customer input. And the customer's never wrong. When you have enough statistically significant data on the customer, they are the right person in the room and you are the expert of that customer. So this is the design thinking framework. I'm going to go through it step by step, but it incorporates 5 steps. It's empathize, define, ideate, prototype, and test. And I'll go through each of those. So before I dive into how we use this framework for building out a customer advisory board, I think it's important to ground you guys in what the challenges we were facing today at Dropbox. So first and foremost, our product teams were keeping the roadmap very close to the chest. They were not feeling comfortable and vulnerable to share their roadmap, even though, yeah, it might change in the future. And we had to get them to a point where they were on the journey to realize that it's okay to share a scrappy prototype to these customers and get them engaged early on to fill that feedback loop. We weren't building advocates, so we were doing more of the taking, to be honest. We were saying, here's all the things that we want to learn from you as customers, and then we'd go off and take that feedback. But what were they trying to get out of it? What was their experience? Why are they investing their time? Which leads me to, they didn't know the why. We didn't know their why. Like, why do you invest all this time as a customer advisory board member? Why do you keep showing up every year? Why do you attend different conversations that we have? And what's in it for them? And last but not least, we weren't listening. So a funny story, so our first customer advisory board in New York, we had our programming where it was about 80% of the content us talking, and about 20% where customers are sharing. And you can imagine as you start this day at a customer advisory board, you say, we're here to listen, we're here to talk to you, and we do all the talking. What's even worse is our product leader at the time actually spoke an hour over his talk track. So it actually got to a point where that 20% of customer sharing time was only 5%, which was pretty poor form, and we knew we could do better. So we had this hypothesis. They're not engaged with the conventional ways that we're listening to them. How do we actually build a program that matters to them, but also serves for what we need as a company? And how might we is basically how do we create a best-in-class experience where we're able to listen to our top customers and have that actually funnel into the direction of our strategy and our product. So the first step of design thinking, as I mentioned before, is empathize. Empathize is really focusing on getting to know your customers in full detail. For the case of the customer advisory board, I wanted to go after 2 specific cohorts. The first group of people I interviewed were people who have attended customer advisory boards at other organizations similar to Dropbox. And you'd be surprised, I just stalk people on LinkedIn and say, do you have 30 minutes of your time? And actually almost everyone responded with, yes, I'd love to help you out. You don't have to compensate them. People are really happy to be heard. And this is a great way to kind of just get my foot in the door of why people attend these different advisory boards. The other thing you note is that if you talk to one person who's on a customer advisory board, chances they know 10 other people on customer advisory boards. So you only need to find a few people to then have that word of mouth spread. The second was customer advisory board organizers. So I went out again on LinkedIn and looked up what are the types of roles that are customer advisory board leaders and what are they specifically doing in their organizations? What does best in class look like? What are they challenged with? So I could get a good grounding of what we need to do. So from all these interviews, I had pages and pages of insights, and I put each insight on a Post-it note, which you can imagine sounds tedious at first, but bear with me. We do this thing in design thinking called affinity mapping, where you actually take all the different insights and you consolidate them into specific themes that arise. So before you know it, you'll start clustering, okay, a lot of customers feel they really like networking and connecting, and their why is this. Or maybe everyone really hates this part of customer advisory boards, and you can start to really sift through the positives and the negatives. And I also am a big fan of the 2x2. I know that Tanya from Atlassian talked about that yesterday. That's another thing that we use as a good way to say, you know, what's the fastest time to market with an idea? Or maybe the metric is how luxe do we make it? Whatever the case may be, there's a lot of ways that you can kind of cut through all the insights and make sense of it. So a few things we found, like I said before, the why is actually not us. So we were sitting here being like, they're so excited to hear about Dropbox and our product roadmap and all these cool things. No, they're there to talk to one another. They're there to learn from each other, similar to what we're doing here. And they're there to basically get to a place where they have advocates or maybe other peers in their organization to help them along their journey with all those challenges they're facing with a ton of tools. They also want similar role types. So there were cases where people felt like the altitude was different. Maybe someone was a very senior level in a customer advisory board and someone was just starting out their career, and that didn't really make sense. They also want to make sure that the goals that they have for their organization in the future are the same that we are actually building. So making sure that we're open with our roadmap and they can be open with theirs. And also that we want to build advocates is what we're realizing. Like, we want them to be champions. Like, a customer advisory board, one part of it is feedback, but the next is they're going to go back to their organizations and say, do you want to use this tool or not? And if we equip them well enough and we make them feel part of the journey, they're more likely to be those advocates. And then last but not least, don't underestimate the group bonding activities. So I had a few executives say, oh, it's really fluffy to do bonding activities or something, in the middle of the day that's different than just sitting around a table and having a kumbaya. And what I realized is actually this was the highest energy point for most people's days in a customer advisory board was the networking drinks like we had yesterday, or going off and doing something cool like go-karting. That was actually what bonded people the most, and it's not to be underestimated even with business leaders that you're trying to convince. The next step is defining the problem. So in the case for us, we use this thing called energy mapping. So anytime you interview a customer, you do an energy map, which is what are all the points where they're most excited, the most engaged, they're raising their voice, there's a lot of good ideas and their eyes wide open. And what are the moments where they're really disappointed? Like maybe they're like, oh, this is super frustrating when I have to deal with this. And doing an energy map is really helpful to quickly get to what are the things that we need to focus on around high energy experiences and low energy experiences. So for this guy, Faye, I won't go into too much detail, but basically he said he loved making access to leadership, feeling like he's part of the journey, and also feeling like he's very special. And then I think some of the low points were like, okay, I've been going to customer advisory boards for 11 years, and I still don't think we've nailed the content. There's probably only 20% that's relevant to me. And it started bringing up questions like, why is he still doing this if it's not all relevant? So this point of view framework is basically a way to say, okay, we met this guy, Faye. We were surprised to notice he only likes 20% of the content, even though he's going every year for 11 years. I wonder if this means we need to reimagine the way we do customer advisory boards, and it'd be game-changing to basically change and flip the entire format on its head to say, why don't customers dictate the entire format of a CAB? How can it be completely led by them and not selfishly led by what Dropbox wants? So the next step is the ideation phase. And I think this is probably one of the most energizing and exciting phases of the program, which is basically you get a bunch of people in a room. We call this term radical collaboration. So the more differing views, like viewpoints and personality types in a room, the better ideas you create because you're solving for all different use cases. And we asked the question, if you had all the money in the world, how would you solve the challenges that Faye is facing today? And so it turns into this post-it note frenzy, and we actually enlisted the entire Dropbox Sydney team to be a part of this. So we have about 50 people in our Sydney office, and it was in this hallway where everyone walks by, and it was just very much, okay, get a post-it note, how would you solve this guy's problem? And there were people that had no context on what the customer advisory board was that came up with some of the coolest ideas. In design thinking as well as improv, you might have heard a term called yes and, which is basically whatever an idea someone comes up with, you add onto it and say yes and. And I know that sounds very challenging at times because you're like, oh my God, where do I even build off this idea? But I promise you it works. Let me give you an example. So we say no idea is a bad idea, and I'm sure you're like, I've heard a ton of bad ideas in my career, but again, bear with me. So one of the first post-it notes in this brainstorming session was, let's rent out a mansion and just bring a bunch of customers and hang out with us all day. And I'm like, oh boy, here we go. This is already going off the rails in my mind. But we said, all right, yes and, keep adding onto it, keep building off it. So then it evolved into, okay, what if we did a beach offsite where we get them engaged and get to know them more as people? And then it kept evolving again and yes-anding. And then it got to a place where it was like, why don't we just make them feel like Dropboxers? Like, we're so excited about what we do every day. We are passionate about working for this company. How do we make them feel like extensions of our brand so that they feel like champions in their own organizations? So the next stage is prototyping. So once you think you have like a final idea of what you want this like 2.0 to be, in the case for customer advisory boards, is where you actually build a prototype. So from all these insights we gathered, some key themes came out. It was basically, we want customers talking way more of the time. We want the audience role clearly defined. We want to make work human. We want people to feel like extensions of Dropbox. We want them to also be able to feel open in sharing their future challenges and strategies, but also for us to be vulnerable enough to share our roadmap, even if it's not fully baked. So when I mean scrappy MVP prototype, low fidelity, like we're talking scrappy. Like I took scraps of paper and put this together, which was basically, I created a diagram which is most valuable sessions that a customer would want to engage in and least. And then I created a bunch of scraps which had all the sessions of last year's customer advisory board and all the potential sessions we could do this year for customer advisory board. And then I went to our customer success team who actually owns the relationships with these customers and knows them day in and day out, and said, how do you actually prioritize what matters most to them and how would you rank it? So I had all these people on my desk shuffling these pieces of paper, and the quick early test was that it was validated, that all these new sessions were actually more what these customers would get value out of, and some of the ones that we had last year were the least. So that was like a validation point. And what I love about an MVP is you're not spending thousands of dollars to make a mistake. You can do it pretty quickly, and you can get a good sense of the direction. And then the final stage is testing it, so actually going to market. So we had one customer advisory board. We had a New York customer advisory board. The SF1 was canceled due to coronavirus last week. But we had a chance to test this in New York to actually get a sense of, did this new format, this 2.0, actually perform? And I'm proud to say it actually was really successful. So of the customers, 100% of the people felt heard, felt connected to peers, felt like they would participate again, compared to about 80% last time we did this. The other thing is people felt very satisfied with the direction of the roadmap, and we actually felt really excited that we shared vulnerable future-related things that may change, but at least we shared it with them to have them part of the journey. And so you can imagine at this point, you're like, okay, we kind of did really well. Like, where do you go from here? There's actually a lot more involved into this testing phase, and you're not done. So I'll take you guys through how that iterated in a moment. So some final feedback is that customers feel special. It was a well-orchestrated event. We've been asking for things for years, and you're finally delivering on it. It was a pleasure to hear from product owners, from other companies and peers. And people really felt like they were part of the future. We're contributing to the future direction of Dropbox, and it's all about those tangible feedback loops. So all the feedback that they shared 2 years ago was taken into account. And if it wasn't built, if we didn't take all their feedback, we acknowledged it and said, we heard you on these things. We couldn't deliver on these things because these other areas were a priority, and at least they felt heard. And then the last step is really building out that feedback loop. So just because you get all these insights and you do these customer advisory boards, that's only the first part of the swing. Finishing out the swing is actually going out and saying, how does this influence the roadmap? So one of the best practices we had this past year is having someone very senior, head of product, as my sponsor for this project. And so he is now responsible for engaging and getting and rallying his entire engineering organization to start using these insights to build the future products and shape the future way we're heading as a company. And like I said, we're not done. You think after those results that there's nothing left to do and you can keep operating the way you are. But for example, coronavirus, we designed this entire event to be in person. So now I have to go back and do this whole iterative process again with how would this look virtually. And also things, for example, like we've now got other segments we want to go after. The one we just did was for business segments. Now we want to go after small business. So now I need to go back. The small businesses have all different challenges and whys, as you call it, for why they want to be motivated and get involved. So it's an ongoing journey and it's an iterative process, but it's a great way to continue reinventing yourself and the way that you show up to your customers and the way that feedback is brought through to the organization. So with that, thank you. Yep.
Thanks very much, Bree. That was a great presentation.
Thank you.
Definitely get around customer advisory boards. We ran the first one last year and it's super successful as well. A couple of questions from the crowd. If you want to get your questions in, drop them into Slido now, but I'll ask you a couple that have come through. Yeah. The first one, so these are all from yesterday as well. So cabs have historically been owned by product management in this particular organization. Do you think it can still be successful to set it up like this at this person's business?
as opposed to like run by
Owned
PMs?
by PMs, yep.
Okay. I definitely probably want to talk to you a bit more offline because it's very nuanced in terms of like what you're solving for and how your organization is structured. This is what worked best for us at Dropbox because product marketers are empowered to be this functional glue between a lot of different teams. I've seen it work at a lot of other companies where it's its own separate program. So there's a person who runs community and programs, and it covers all spans of different organizations. But what I found is that when you're separate from product and you're separate from product marketing and it sits siloed, you don't get that full feedback loop. So this person is there running a program, but then there's no one championing the insights and bringing it back to the product team. And so I would have to probably talk to you offline. Come find me after because I want to understand how your organization is structured and how product marketing sits. But in the case for Dropbox, I would recommend it to be someone who owns that functional glue between a lot of different teams and having someone who's a product sponsor to actually sponsor the work and all those insights.
I think that leads into one of these other questions, which is, did you share your whole product roadmap with the customer advisory board? How did you get product management comfortable with sharing this externally?
Great question. Yeah, so like I said, it was a challenge, and you guys probably face this in a lot of different ways, which is the product team is still iterating on their future roadmap, right? And they don't want to be like promising all these beautiful things that are going to happen in the future and then none of it gets delivered. I think first and foremost internally, starting with engineering, you can't have product market fit unless you get customer feedback. And so customer feedback needs to be a part of that experience. And the more that you can educate people and get people even tops down to start saying things like, well, what did the customer say? The more that gets championed internally as a key part of it. I would say that's a big solve for that. It's quite challenging though. I would say the other thing with product roadmaps is you have to expectation set externally to customers. You can't just say, this is all baked and we're launching all this. You need to say, you guys are in the kitchen. Like, this is messy. This is not perfect. And we're prototyping. Like, for the cab we had 2 weeks ago in New York, product managers were coming up with prototypes they'd scrapped together within days. And if you just set the expectation up front, this is not baked. And the reason it's not baked is we don't want to invest thousands of resources and dollars into this. Then there's a lot more understanding and forgiveness. So I think it's about expectation setting. And it's also bringing engineers and PMs on the journey. And then also making sure tops down, they feel customer centricity is a part of the way that products need to move forward.
Absolutely. How formalized are these customer advisory boards? Do they meet on a regular cadence?
Yeah.
And would you select new people on these boards for new products, which I'm guessing means new product betas for whoever asked that question?
Okay. Yeah, I can start.
Yep.
So we do it once a year. We started off with once a year, which was just a once a year in-person event, and it was a half-day experience. And we're now starting to digitize that experience to quarterly. So two things. We're going to do a partway through visit where an executive flies out, once coronavirus is done, an executive flies out and actually does a roundtable partway through the year to say, hey, here's some of the progress we've made, some of your feedback and how it's been taken on board, and just get them to feel connected with our executive team. And then we're also looking at doing quarterly engagements like webinars on like, hey, here's more features that we're thinking of launching, and then get that buy-in. In terms of frequency, it kind of depends on the organization. And then I think with pivoting towards different groups, what was the second part of the question again?
The second part of the question was, would you select new people on the board for a new product? I'm guessing that means product beta or like prototyping. Yep.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the point of a customer advisory board is to keep them consistent as members ongoing. But like I said, we're doing another small business customer advisory board, and that requires a whole new set of people. The thing that I would stray away from is just get really crystal clear on who is going to be in that board, because you want them to be there ongoing over time. And it's also really hard to measure success of a customer advisory board if you have one group come one year and then a different group come the next year. There's no way to say, okay, we gave you feedback and now you implemented it if there's a whole new set of faces in the audience. So I would try to get crystal clear. Obviously there's changes. Some people, drop off your product, or they're in different stages of the organization, or people leave that were champions of your product. And so we understand that happens, but I think the best practice with CABS is to try to keep it consistent and be really crystal clear on it. And you can also do lightweight cabs. Like, we've obviously gotten to a place where we were pretty clear on who our audience and target was, but you can do smaller roundtables and maybe not call it a membership in the early days just to suss out what's the right audience. And the role is actually something that's also critical. We had a lot of people of different altitudes in the first set of cabs, and we realized like everyone needs to be a certain seniority. And so there was a lot of conversations and back and forth on who that role type was. So just be aligned with product teams on what you're trying to solve for and who that right audience is. But we understand it does vary over time.
Yeah, absolutely. And just to, before we wrap up, there's one more for the B2C marketers in the room.
Yeah.
You obviously come from a B2B company and you've got a lot of companies on board. Do you think this would work in a B2C environment?
Yeah, Dropbox is actually B2C as well. We started off as B2C, and actually our new customer advisory board we're reimagining this year for small businesses and consumers is going to be B2C. So yes, you can definitely take this framework, and a lot of what I'm building right now is a strategy for that, and it's using a lot of the same methodology, just with a different audience. Again, going back to the question, really understand the small business or the consumer why, and also with a consumer advisory board, just make sure, again, you're crystal clear on their role types and that audience, because it can really get too far vast and wide and to a point where you're getting too many insights and you're not sure where they're coming from. Just be clear on who that audience is.
Awesome. Thank you very much,
Yeah,
Bree.
cool.